Day live for August 16th. And I'm here with my good friend, John Ulzheimer. Always good to have you back. And today, I was intrigued with that email that you sent me. I finally got around to listening to that podcast. Clearly, it was an abbreviated version with Dan Smith from the CDIA. And by the way, for everybody watching, this isn't going to be like heavy into CDIA or VantageScore or anything like that. But I thought it was interesting enough to maybe spend a couple minutes on it. And of course, this is all Q&A. So when you're watching, feel free to ask a question. It doesn't even have to be on topic. John and I will answer whatever question that you've got, provided it's not directly credit repair how-to related. But if that's the case, you can always post it, and I can swing back around a little bit later on. John, what were your thoughts on that? I know you brought it up, so I thought maybe you had something in mind that you wanted to go over.
Yeah, so just for the folks who are watching who don't know what CDIA is, the CDIA, well, it's an acronym. The CDIA is the Consumer Data Industry Association. They are the trade association of the credit reporting agencies. So companies like Equifax and Experian and TransUnion are members of the CDIA. So when the CDIA makes public statements with respect to kind of like their positions, then you can kind of infer that those positions are also the positions of the credit reporting agencies. They had, well, I'm on my third president of the CDIA now. We've gone from Stuart Pratt to Francis Creighton to now Dan Smith. I have not met Dan. I've not had the pleasure or opportunity to meet him. I suspect I will get to meet him someday. So Dan did an interview with a guy named Jeff Richardson, and Jeff is the vice president of communications for VantageScore. Full disclosure, Jeff is a friend of mine. He's a really good guy. And so he had Dan on, and they did a fairly short, podcast, maybe 15 minutes long. Yep. And among other things, they discussed credit repair. And so as far as I know, and I could be wrong, but as far as I know, or that I'm aware of, that was the CDIA's first kind of public statement with respect to credit repair since Dan took over as the president of the trade association. Clearly, they've made statements about credit repair in the past. So for those of you who have not listened to the podcast, don't worry. I suspect none of you have. You can either go to my Facebook page, or I don't know if David wants to post a link to it somewhere. But it's a quick listen. Some of the stuff is, not really stuff I'm terribly interested in. But there was about a 3 or 4 minute segment on credit repair. So he was, Dan was very diplomatic with respect to the topic of credit repair. He certainly did not come out and trash credit repair. He and Jeff were Jeff more so was, pretty vocal with respect to identifying that there are different types of credit repair companies within kind of this broader credit repair universe, if you will. I think the term they use is one bad apple can spoil the lot. And unfortunately, it's the bad apples that get the most attention. Get the most attention. No one ever, identifies a credit repair company that's doing a really good job in treating consumers the right way. It's always the dirt bags that are out there trying to rip consumers off.
It's the bad press that really gets the attention.
Yeah, that's right. If it bleeds, it leads. That's what the media, kind of the mantra of the media. If it bleeds, it leads. So I think the comments were pretty benign. He definitely did not take any pot shots at the industry, which I think was actually probably pretty smart. I don't know that you want to, your first public statement about an industry that is pretty fairly closely tied to credit reporting. I'm not sure you want to come out guns blazing. So it'll be interesting to see if their position evolves over time, or perhaps if it softens even more over time. So not that anyone watching is super interested in that. To me, it's very interesting because of what I do and what I follow for a living. I was actually really interested in, or very pleasantly surprised to hear how kind of neutral he was on the topic.
Yeah. No, it's funny how we've always had this discussion in the credit repair space for, even though I think, in my observation, being in this business for now, coming up on 11 years, it sounds funny to say that sometimes, uh, but I've watched this industry get cleaned up a lot. I mean, it was, and this is coming from early on when nearly all of my time was spent on the phones and doing consultations and enrolling people into credit repair, and then hearing all of the horror stories. Like, I paid X, Y, and Z $1,000 up front, or whatever the case may
Mm.
be, and nothing happened. And oh my gosh, that, like, I felt it, it, it was one of those things where my consultations with people, I would say 1 out of 5 was like apologizing for the industry and what they experienced, and that, this is this is not the experience that they're going to have with us. But one bad apple spoils the lot. And I think there has been a reason over the last couple of decades why the industry does still have a little bit of a shady reputation around it, and it's not because of guys like Dan or like Jeff from Score. It's really the industry that having done it to itself, and then those people make a quick exit, whether it's forced upon them by regulatory agencies, or they go off and do whatever the next thing is. But it's nice to see that they came at it with more of a neutral position, because how many credit reports, retail price credit reports, are ordered as a result of the credit repair industry. I
Yeah.
mean, it's probably most of it, I would argue, John. I mean, think about it. I mean, where can you not get a free credit report these days, including your credit card company and annual credit report? And if you're enrolled in, even in Crediversal, you're doing it yourself. There's still a cost of a 3B with a score, which currently isn't free. So that's going to be the case pretty much everywhere as far as the revenue generator.
Yeah, so I think the kind of the dirt bags that you're referring to, the ones that are charging $1,000 up front, and then all of a
Yeah.
sudden they disappear and they're not returning. That's why there is a Credit Repair Organizations Act. That's why CROA
Yeah.
exists. And so we're now, I think, on the 27. It's now 27 years old, if I'm not mistaken, the Credit
Mm-hmm.
Repair Organizations Act. And so for the folks watching now, and for the folks who watched us on replay later on, either later today or somewhere down the road, that's one of the components of CROA, which what can a credit repair company do, and what are they not allowed to do as per CROA? And one of the things that they're not allowed to do is they're not allowed to take payment up front, and that's
Yeah.
pretty clearly articulated in the act. So if you ever run into a scenario where someone's telling you, "Hey, just cut me a check for $1,000, and over the next 6 months, I'll clean up your credit reports," that's illegal. You can't. That's clearly payment in advance, and so CROA dictates that you can't take payment until services are fully rendered. So, whenever people ask me, John, how do you tell the difference between a good credit repair company and a bad credit repair company? I'm like, I don't know. I mean, maybe see which ones are following the law. That seems like
Yeah.
to be a pretty good starting point. Which ones are charging up front? Which ones are guaranteeing results? That's
Yeah.
another one. I can increase your FICO score 100 points in 30 days. That's guaranteeing results. That's also a violation of CROA. Those who are not giving you the mandatory disclosures, there's a ton of disclosures that credit repair companies have to provide to their prospective customers in advance. And so if you're signing up and you're not really doing anything other than giving your credit card number, that's a CROA violation. So, that's probably something people should keep their eyes on, is who's following the rules and who isn't.
Yeah. And one thing too, and we got some questions already posted up, so that's great. We'll get to these in a second. But as a general rule, John, these are not activities that you're trustworthy and reliable and experienced credit repair agencies do. I mean,
Well, if they did that, they wouldn't be
they wouldn't be
experienced.
around.
They'd be
Yeah.
gone. So that may be what the credit repair company that's in and out of business in 6 months does. But for a credit repair company that's been around for 10 years, give or take, they're going to have to comply with CROA, or they would have been nailed
Yeah.
probably repeatedly long ago.
Yeah. Question from Greg: why do they have multiple agencies? They all report the same things differently than the other. There should be one universal agency, in my opinion. Yeah, it's a good question and a good observation. And John will go into depth as to why we have more than just one.
Well, I don't know who they is. Why do they have who is they? No one has multiple agencies. There's actually way more than three. So I'm
Love.
sorry to pile on. It, there was a time where there were literally dozens and dozens and dozens of credit reporting agencies that were peppered throughout the country that kind of handled regional parts of the country, and then through consolidation and acquisition, we end up with the big three, even though we kind of all know that there are actually more than three companies that are defined as consumer reporting agencies. So there should be one universal. So I'll tell you straight up, that was a drum that the Biden administration was beating during the campaign when they were campaigning against former President Trump. Is that the CFP was going to CFPB was going to eliminate credit reporting agencies and bring the process in-house and housed under the CFPB as essentially a government-controlled entity. While I obviously respect everyone's opinions, I'm going to respectfully disagree. You show me one thing that the U.S. government does better than private industry, and I would be shocked. So, all three of the companies are publicly traded, so they're really no different than Ford and Chevrolet and Toyota and Honda in that respect. So Tesla. So I'm actually, to be quite honest with you, Greg, I'm surprised there aren't more than three. Being a credit reporting agency is a great business to be in. You've got the reputational issues. But man, oh man, it's if you ever study the business model of a credit reporting agency, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. There's no cost of goods. Everything that they sell is given to them. So you have like 14,000 companies that willingly, voluntarily, at no cost, send information to these companies, which then normalize the information and then turn around and compile it into reports and then turn right around and sell it to the same organizations that gave them the information in the first place. What a fantastic business model for the credit reporting agency. I mean, no other industry is like that. Automotive, drug, and apparel, nothing. They all buy the things and then they make something out of the stuff and then they turn around and sell it at some sort of a markup. Where the credit industry, the core product is given to them at no cost. So I am actually surprised, given the era of disruption where we currently live, that we don't have a fifth, the sixth, the seventh, and eighth credit reporting agency. And there's reasons why we don't. I don't want to burn through David's 45 minutes going through all that stuff. It's a fantastic conversation, but not something that you may be terribly interested in. I think there's a potential that we can end up with a fourth someday. There's actually a company called Innovis Data Solutions, Innovis. Greg, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of them, but you actually have a credit report with Innovis Data Solutions. You may not care, or you may not be aware of that, but you actually do. Innovis does not sell their credit reports to lenders like how an Equifax or a TransUnion would sell credit reports to lender. There also is no FICO score on the Innovis database. And so you can't buy your FICO score based on Innovis data. Having said that, that doesn't mean that some company with deep pockets can't come in and try to acquire Innovis Data Solutions and kind of backfill some stuff here and there and create a functional fourth credit reporting agency that would sell credit reports to lenders just like the big three sell to lenders. I would be very interested to see something like that happen someday. I've never quite understood. I'm sure there may be contractual things that we don't know about that operate behind the scenes, but I've never really understood why Innovis hasn't monetized all this data that they have in their systems, because it's pretty redundant with what's in the systems of the big three.
Yeah, Greg, one of the, just reading the back end of your question there about, maybe there should be one universal agency, and that I don't know that that's even really feasible, because one of the core principles of the business model is that all the data submission is voluntary. So it's one of the reasons why you have your bureaus can have different information on them, because you might have a creditor that reports to Experian only, and they don't report to TransUnion, and they don't report to Equifax, and that's a choice that they've made for whatever reason, and that's why we have different data on all three bureaus. And yeah, it is a little bit crazy, when you stand back and look at it, but that's kind of where we are as a result of how it evolved over the last, 5, 6, 7 decades or so.
I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had over the years with people who say they're entrepreneurs, who have wanted to have the discussion of how do we create another credit bureau? How can I create a fourth credit bureau? What's the process of building a credit bureau? And of course, once I get off the phone with them, I'm quite certain I've talked them out of it. But it's certainly been something that has been a topic of interest and conversation for me personally for many years.
Yeah. All right, let's see. We got Mandy with a question. My question is, what does your FICO 8 scores need to be to achieve a 580 to 620? FICO 5, 4, and 2. Let me see.
So FICO 5, 4, and 2, Mandy, I think you also followed up a second later and indicated you meant FICO 8. Yeah. So just for the folks watching, David, I don't know if they can see the questions. I'm sure they can see them on Facebook eventually. FICO 5, 4, and 2 are the ones that are the versions that are currently used in mortgage lending. So you may have been thinking about the scores used for mortgage lending. FICO 8, which is, by the way, 2 generations off the most current version, has critical mass of users. At least that's according to FICO. So in other words, a large enough volume of scores are being calculated on FICO 8 that FICO indicates that they have critical mass. So I'm reading your question, and I'm not entirely sure I understand it. What does your FICO and scores need to be to achieve a FICO 580 to 620? Maybe if you want to, okay, so you're trying to get approved for a mortgage loan. So then, it is FICO 5, 4, and 2 that's important, unless you're working with a lender that doesn't care about Fannie and Freddie, and they can just underwrite based on whatever scoring system they want. With ultimate respect, 580 and 620 is between 100 and 140 points below the national average. So those are relatively easy scores to achieve because they're fairly low. So if
I think the 580 and 620, I don't know about now, but it used to be the VA spread. So if you're looking at a VA loan,
okay,
I don't know.
I would. I don't know what your timeline is, and of course, mortgage interest rates are around 7 right now, so they're not great. But to the extent that you're trying to buy a home, I think that's wonderful. There's nothing better than mowing your own lawn when it's 100 degrees outside. To the extent you can aim higher, I think that might be time well spent. If your scores are so much lower than 580 to 620 that's just a realistic thing, then remember 7% is for someone who's got good credit. So 580 to 620, I don't know what kind of APR you get through a VA loan, but if you were talking, conventional 30-year fixed rate Fannie or Freddie, 580 to 620 is going to get you something considerably higher than 7% right now, which means your monthly payments are going to be very, very high, and you're going to have to kind of realign or recalibrate the price of the home that you're looking at because of affordability issues. But look, the roadmap to higher scores, regardless of whether you're trying to get them to 580 or you're trying to get them to 780, is relatively the same. For someone who has scores below 580, they're down there because of derogatory information on credit reports. You don't end up with a 580 because you have a couple of inquiries. So obviously I can't give you credit repair advice because that's not what I do. That's really more of a David thing. But as the derogatory information on your credit report ages, it's going to lose negative value and your scores are going to increase organically just by putting time between yourself and the event. Now, the important thing is you don't continue to do it which means that you're kind of inadvertently re-aging negative information because it's continually being added to your credit reports as new negative information. So if the information on your credit reports is correct and and the information is verifiable and the credit reporting agencies are going to maintain it, then draw a line in the sand and say, that's it. I'm not going to miss any more payments ever. Time will start to elapse between now and your bad credit. And you'd be surprised how quickly 12, 24 months, your scores are going to start going up because the age of your derogatory report information is getting older. If you did absolutely nothing, I guarantee you within 3 to 4 years, you probably have scores that are fairly respectable, if not impressive. Obviously, I'm telling you a pretty distant time frame right now for waiting to buy a home, but that's the reality of the situation, right? I mean, it's saddling yourself with credit scores below 580. You can't just snap your fingers and all of a sudden that stuff is gone and now you're at 740 or some considerably higher score. You've got to be realistic with your expectations, and sometimes that can take time. But certainly the stuff, the 580 and below, that's being driven largely by derogatory information. And so once you start letting that stuff age as quickly as even 12 months, you're going to start seeing your scores go up.
All right, great answer. Sean, good evening, David. Had some collections. They were gone for days on my report, and they appeared back saying they were verified. It's very upsetting. Yeah, it happens, Sean. If you have a specific question, you can post it up on there. But
reinsertion.
Yeah, you're right. It's a reinsertion. Typically, they don't disappear for days and then come back. Usually, you see this over the span of one credit report update from another. But yeah, John, if you want to talk about reinsertion, I think that might be a good subject right now.
Yeah, and this isn't specific to you, Sean, but one of the myths regarding credit reporting and disputes and investigations is if you challenge something on a credit report and it's removed or changed, then it can never come back on your credit report, or it can never come back with the negative information. That's not the case at all. If something is removed from your credit report because either A, the furnisher did not respond in a timely manner to the credit bureaus, or if the item was temporarily blocked because the powers that be felt that it was caused by identity theft, that stuff first off, identity theft blocks can be rescinded, which means the stuff can go right back on your credit report. And if information is deleted because it was not verified in a timely manner, then the furnisher can re-report it the following month as long as what they're reporting is correct. Or they have a reason to believe that it is correct. So, and that process is referred to as reinsertion. And you're supposed to get a notice from the credit reporting agencies that the information has been reinserted. I can tell you anecdotally that it's my understanding either a whole lot of consumers are giving me incorrect information, or the process of notifying after reinsertion is not as efficient as perhaps it could be.
Yeah. All right. Let's see. Third round of letters. Greg, you are welcome.
You are welcome. Yes, sir. You're welcome.
Hey, Greg, I saw you made a big post. It's a little bit too big for us to put up on the screen. It would take up the whole screen, but I get your point, and point well made. Christina, I have collections. How should I handle them when I only have a very limited Social Security income? John, we talk about collections quite a bit and how to handle them. Is that a question you're comfortable with? Or?
Yeah. So, Christina, you're going to get a very different type of answer right now than you're going to get from most of the blogs and YouTube videos that you see floating around on the internet with crazy guys standing in front of Ferraris and trying to sell you stuff. I have always, and I'm going to let David speak for himself. I've always been I have always had the belief that people should pay their debts. That just seems like the right thing to do to me, is to live up to your end of the bargain. Having said that, collections. So once they've gone to collection status, meaning that they're and Christina, I'm assuming when you say I have collections, I think what you mean is that you have accounts that are being handled by a third-party debt collector or a collection agency, and they're trying to collect the debt on behalf of some original creditor, whether that's a doctor or an apartment complex or a credit card issuer or something like that. Um, if the debt has gone to collections, then all debt collectors have some amount of tolerance given to them by the original creditor to settle the debts. So, for example, let's just say hypothetically that one of your collections is for $1,000, just to make the math easy. And by the way, and it's really yours, meaning that it actually belongs to you, not some baloney debt that but does not belong to you and somehow someone's trying to collect. I'm not talking about that garbage. I'm talking about something that is legitimately your debt. So you have this $1,000 debt that you owe some original creditor. They've outsourced it to a third-party debt collector. Now the third-party debt collector is calling you. They're sending you letters. They're reporting it on your credit reports, and you're trying to figure out, what do I do with this? This is the scenario where I would say, talk to the debt collector and try to negotiate a settlement. And that settlement could be 50% of what you owe, 75% of what you owe. It depends on the original creditor. The original creditor gives the debt collector some amount of leeway to settle the debt. Now, let's just say hypothetically, and I'm making this up, let's say the $1,000 balance, let's say that you offer $500 and the debt collector says, we'll take it. And you pay the $500. So now what does that mean? What that means is that, first off, get that in writing so that it's memorialized somewhere. So if you ever have to like show someone, hey, no, you said that 500 is it. So number one, that should be updated on your credit report to show that it has been settled and now the balance is zero, unless it's a medical collection. If it's a medical collection, then it should be, once it's now zero, it should be removed from your credit report. That's the new standard in credit reporting. If it's a collection for something other than medical debt, then it's going to stay on there until the item ages off organically, unless you can work some sort of pay for delete type of deal, which David may talk about how you should make that kind of an offer to them. But another thing to keep in mind, and in your original question, you talked about limited Social Security income. When a debt collector is attempting to collect a debt from a consumer, they have what's called permissible purpose. Permissible purpose is a phrase from the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Permissible purpose is one of the several lists of permissible reasons why a company can pull your credit report. So if a company has permissible purpose, they can actually pull your credit report, and debt collectors have it, which means that if you're ever speaking with a debt collector, it is possible that they're also staring at your credit report while they're having a conversation with you. So when you talk to them, please keep in mind that they may be able to see that you have perhaps credit cards with high limits, with low balances, a home equity line of credit that has available what's called open to buy. In other words, you have an amount that you can currently use. So if you're talking about things like limited income, you might want to just be clear that they may be able to see if you have other sources to be able to make payments, or to make a payment on that debt, perhaps charging it on a credit card, or perhaps using some sort of equity line from a home to also make a payment. So if all of a sudden, if you're speaking with them and they seem like they've got a whole lot of really good information about you, that may be where it's coming from a credit report.
Yeah. Christina, the only thing that I would add, and John and I are certainly on the same page with honoring debts for which we agreed to pay. Now, when we're talking about a third-party collection company, here's where I would add my little twist to it, and that's just because I've had this conversation about collections with thousands of consumers over the last decade, is nothing wrong with sending a dispute first, just to make sure they have a legal right to collect, that they are the company that owns that debt. Because one of the stories I've heard countless times is somebody who've told me that they got they were contacted by a collection company, satisfied the debt, then somebody else bought it. And that becomes a little bit of a hassle. So that's what Credit Versio is going to guide you to do the first one or two disputes, is just saying, hey, listen, it doesn't say this verbatim. paraphrasing, but it's coming from a place of, before we continue the conversation, can you just let me know that you have a legal right to collect, and that you're the person that I need to talk to when it comes to this debt. And sometimes you'll find that they don't have the documentation that's required to live up to that, and it gets deleted. But if you're finding that they're coming back to you saying, yes, we own the debt, they'll send you documentation that only the owner of that debt is going to know, like when it was opened and the balance. And sometimes, to give you an example, a long time ago, I was disputing a Macy's account. I don't know if I told you this one, John. This is when I knew that there was no point in disputing this, is they sent me a packet that thick of all of my statements for like years. I'm like, okay, so I'm going to need to settle this one. Yeah. But listen, Christina, nothing wrong. I mean, exercise your right to dispute it. And then, like John said, and again, this is how we get to that confirmation that this is the third party collection company that needs to be paid, is they will be able to provide you that documentation. Great question. Duke, not a question, but a comment. The Big Three has been extremely transparent over the past 5 years. The FPB taking over wouldn't be a great idea. No, I mean,
no, I entirely agree. So I actually calculated this. So it's interesting. There was an organization that was actually pushing this, kind of a nonprofit think tank. You're welcome, Christina. A nonprofit think tank that was pushing this whole idea of eliminating credit reporting agencies and kind of shifting the function to the CFPB. I have nothing against the CFPB, not at all. But follow me here for a minute. I actually co-presented with her, or this representative from this think tank, at an event in Washington a few years ago, and I was the moderator, and she was on a panel. So I got to ask questions of all the people sitting on the panel, and she was on it. The current president of the CDIA was on it, and then a staff attorney from the National Consumer Law Center was on. So two of the three people on the panel were clearly anti-credit bureau, and then you had the current president of the Credit Bureau's Trade Association. So it was kind of 2-1. It was a little out of balance, and so I asked the person from the think tank, well, which one of the credit reporting agencies are you going to leave standing if you get rid of all but one, and you kind of take this function in as a kind of a subsidiary of the CFPB? And she's like, oh, no. We're going to eliminate all of them. They're all gone. We're going to kind of create a credit bureau. And I was like, oh my God, you really haven't thought this through, have you? And I asked her, I go, do you have any idea? First off, the CFPB, I think, had about 1,600 employees at the time. And I asked her, I said, who's going to handle all of the disputes? Because people are still going to file disputes. They don't care who, if they've got something on their credit report that's wrong or that they want to dispute, they could care less if they're sending the dispute to Equifax or to the CFPB. Someone is still going to have to process the disputes, right? The FCRA still exists. So you're going to have to still comply with it. And I figured, I was like, the CFPB published I call it a green paper instead of a white paper, because it actually has green. The CFPB's logoing is kind of green. And so I call it the green paper. And they published this paper about a decade ago, and they quantified that about 8 million disputes are filed on an annual basis. Credit reporting disputes are filed on an annual basis. There's strong evidence to suggest that that's less than even one credit bureau receives on an annual basis. So we think the 8 million figure is woefully low, okay? We think the figure is actually closer to about 35 million than 8 million.
The CFPB is in for a good time if they think they're going to.
But that's okay. Let's just run with 8 million. Let's just run with 8 million. So divide 8 million by every business day of the year. Go ahead. So y'all do this at your leisure, okay? And then let's just say hypothetically that someone who's really good at their job is processing 50 of those disputes on an 8-hour shift.
That's 21,917 a day.
That's right. Divide that by 50, right? Divide that by 50.
That's 438.
When I was
438.
when I was at Equifax, someone really good at their job was doing about 50 of those a day. So what do we get to? What's 21,000?
438.
How much?
Well, if you divide it by 50, that's 438. So what are you saying? You have to
So
have
that
438 people on staff to.
That means you're going to have to increase your staff of nothing but data entry people by 438, plus management, plus tech, right? Plus
Yeah.
legal. So my point is that they were going to increase the size of they would increase the size of the organization by about 50%, just taking on. That doesn't even include all of the data management of like all the things that a credit bureau has to do with all the 14,000 companies sending them billions of pieces of information on a monthly basis. That doesn't include any of that stuff,
No,
right?
that's just processors.
That's the business side of the business. I'm just talking about just the consumer disputes, which is a very, very small component of operating a credit bureau. So I don't think people really thought through exactly what that would entail to just basically say, oh, we're going to force companies out of business. By the way, the three of them are in states that helped the current president get elected: Georgia, California, and Illinois. And I also figured that about 45,000 people would lose their jobs if in those three states if this actually happened. So this is one of those things that I think conceptually someone had this idea and they're like, wow, this is going to sound really good in a newspaper or on a blog post. But then when you start digging it down and asking questions about it, you start hearing the crickets chirp. Well, what are you going to do with this? Do you realize you're laying off tens of thousands of people? Who's going to handle the disputes? We'll figure those things out someday.
Yeah. Wasn't surprised to hear that. That was crazy. Okay.
Yeah. Thankfully, it didn't happen.
Lost $2,500 for someone to repair my credit with the information. Yeah. I've heard that story so many times.
Hold on. Isn't there a remedy for that in CROA if someone has been ripped off like that?
Yeah, I believe you can sue them, but it's been a long time since I went through that.
So look, Elaho, I don't know how serious you are about becoming an irritant to this company that did this to you. But if you Google Credit Repair Organizations Act 1996, and yes, that's how old it is, I believe you do have some legal remedies to pursue the company that did this to you, assuming that you even know who they are and they haven't, skipped town on.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. James, more of a credit repair question. We typically don't do those on this show. Still trying to get Lates off any suggestions. I mean, you'll hear me say this over and over again. The best dispute reason is always the one that explains why the late payments shouldn't be there. If it's accurate and they're verifying that they're accurate, they will stay. But fortunately, late payments are not as long as they're 30 and 60s. And correct me if I'm wrong, John, the minor derogatories versus major derogatories, 60, 90 plus. The minors are things that you typically recover from pretty quickly. 12, 20
that's
months,
right.
something like that.
Yeah. In credit scoring systems, everything falls into one. Well, actually, everything falls into one of three categories: a major derog, a minor derog, and then what's called a non-bad, which is a statistician's way of saying good, but they can't say good; they have to say non-bad. So non-bad would be something like a credit card account that you're paying on time and it's in good standing and it's always been in good standing. That's a non-bad. We all call those. Everyone else calls that a good account. And then you have major derog, minor derog. Minor derog is something that is currently in good standing, but used to be 30 days delinquent or used to be 60 days delinquent, but it's currently in good standing. That's called a minor derog. Everything else is a major derog. Charge-offs, collections, bankruptcies, tax liens and judgments when they are on credit reports, accounts that are currently past due, settlements, 90 days late, 120, 150, 180, short sale, anything like that on a credit report, that's all considered a major derog. So minor derogs are called minor derogs for a reason, because they have less of an impact on scores and are, as David correctly just indicated, you can recover from them more quickly than if you have, for example, a charged off account The good thing about minor derogs is because the account is not in default. Remember, it's in good standing. Because it's not in default, the credit bureaus don't have to delete it from your credit report. And that's actually good news. It's not bad news. What they do have to do eventually is they have to delete the late payments. So each of those little late payments has a vintage. And that vintage is no more than 7 years. And we all know that the credit bureaus delete stuff at 6 years and 9 months. That's been a 30-year practice of the credit bureaus, and it's certainly not a secret. So even though you may have accounts that had delinquencies, because they're in good standing and they didn't go to default or to a collection status, then what's going to happen is those old delinquencies will eventually start aging off the credit report, but the good account as a whole will remain on a credit report, which obviously you want to stay.
Terry just jumped on. Can I use Credit Versa to repair someone else's credit as a credit repair service? No, that's not really what it's for, Terry. It's a end user DIY. I mean, I know people do it. And if you have a spouse, you want to help them, you can. But everybody has their own individual account that links to their own individual credit report. And it's really kind of a moot point because the software is going to, anything that a so-called credit expert would provide as a service, the software is going to guide the person through anyway. But again, like I said, I know that there are people who use it for that. Greg had my Nelnet 90-day late from 2012 updated to never late. First round through Versio. Thank you. I truly believe it wasn't. 2012. Well, that's pretty close to. That's a long time for a 90-day to be on there.
Yeah, that would have had to age off sometime in 2000. Maybe Greg. So if you had a 90-day late that was from 2012, it would have had to age off sometime in 2019.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Terry, you are welcome. Okay. Well, we are coming down to the end of it. Just as we finish up the last comment and question. And if anybody else has another question, please throw it up here real quick. We're getting ready to jump off. It was there last month. Okay. Well, it probably isn't from 2012, Greg. That would be very unusual for something to be there.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, that'd be. I don't know. That would probably be the first time I'd see something like that.
Yeah, I can't do that.
Yeah, that's.
And that's actually less. Actually, I would suggest that's not a Nelnet. And for those of you who don't know who Nelnet is they're a student loan servicer. That's actually not a Nelnet issue, believe it or not, even though it's a late payment on a Nelnet account. When companies report delinquencies to the credit bureaus, the company is not responsible for sitting there with a clock and watching their clock and, I got to delete it now. It's been 7 years. That's not what happens. It's the credit reporting agencies that are responsible. Because remember, Nelnet is not a credit reporting agency. They're a furnisher of information to the credit reporting agencies. And also Nelnet does not compile credit reports. And so no one buys a credit report from Nelnet or any other furnisher of information to the credit bureaus. So when Nelnet and any other company reported that delinquency to the credit bureaus, it's now up to the credit bureaus to keep track of how old that item is. And when they compile a credit report for some end user to use, they're the ones who are supposed to make sure that nothing that is not allowed to be reported is reported. And that would include, in the example that you just gave, an 11-year-old late payment, which clearly exceeds the 7-year allowable time frame for reporting.
Let's wrap up with Carissa's question. Last one submitted. We're at about the 44-minute mark. Okay, why does paying off a car note reduce your credit rating, even if it's not the oldest account on your profile?
Yeah, so the interesting thing about car loans and other installment loans is installment debt, and people get really upset when I bring this up, but installment debt is not very predictive of elevated risk. And because it's not terribly predictive of elevated risk, it really has no meaningful impact on your scores. You can have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of installment debt and still have credit scores well into the 800s. You can't have that amount of credit card debt and have credit scores in the 800s, but you can absolutely have a gigantic amount of installment debt and still have elite level credit scores. So that's number one. What often confuses people is, well, wait a minute, I just got done, selling my home and therefore paying off a mortgage loan, or whatever. I wrote a gigantic check and paid off a truck loan or a car loan. In some scenarios, the score stays the same, or in other scenarios, it actually goes down. And the reason it goes, and it doesn't have anything to do with it being the youngest or oldest account on your credit report. That is an independent and unique measurement that has nothing to do with debt. The reason that your score can go down after paying off an installment loan is because you actually are rewarded for recent activity on installment accounts. And if you look on FICO's website, you can even do some Googling, why did my score go down after I paid off a loan? And you'll actually see an article on FICO's website written by not a blog, an actual reputable person from FICO, that explains that there's actually an empirical benefit to managing installment debt, because it tends to be, it's a different type of debt than revolving, right? So having a credit card is very different than managing a home loan. Having a credit card is very different than managing an auto loan. There's other responsibilities that go with those types of loans: insurance, escrows, taxes, that don't come into play with credit card debt. So even though they're both considered debt, they're certainly not equal debts in the eyes of a credit scoring system, which is why, unfortunately, this happened to me too. I've gone through the same thing that you're going through, and it doesn't drop precipitously. It's a slight decrease that can easily be rectified by just lowering your credit card balances a bit. But it absolutely does happen. It's not a myth, and it's not that the system is broken. That's an intent. That's actually intended. Because you're rewarded for managing installment debt, and if you don't have one to manage, then your scores can go down a little bit.
Yeah, pretty common thing, Chris. I've heard that so many times, and had the same thing happen with me when I turned my car in on a lease. That was the end of the auto loan, and I did see a little bit of a drop, but like John said, I recouped it pretty quickly. I think it was just a few months later, my score was back up to where it was prior to the end of the auto loan. Okay, that is it. Raw, actually, I see that you have a question here. What I'll do is, John, I will let you jump off, and then I'll answer this last one right here because it's a little bit more credit repair related. And again, thank you so much for joining me, John. Great answers today, and then we will get together again in another couple weeks.
All right, David. Thank you for having me. Have a good one.
Right. Take care. Okay, Raw. So we'll hang on for another minute or two, and I'll answer this for you. So let me bring this up on the screen. Know that disputing an open account is not right, but if by mistake an open account is disputed, what could happen? And then I see that you're referencing an inquiry. Okay, my question was directed for inquiries done by car dealers. Nothing to worry about. So a couple of things, Raw. Let me back up here. When you have a bunch of inquiries, and this is a very, very common thing. Let's say you went to an auto dealership and they ran your credit all around town, several different banks, credit unions, try to get you approved for the best rate. Let's say you've got 6 or 7 inquiries on your credit report as a result. So a couple things to take comfort in. Number one is that that FICO understands that you're shopping. VantageScore does as well. So they're going to do something called deduping the inquiries. What that means is, as long as it's within the same industry, and anytime you apply for something, it does identify the industry. Is it auto? Is it mortgage? Is it a credit card? Is it a personal loan? Is it something else? And that way FICO and VantageScore both understand that you're not shopping for 7 different cars. You're shopping for one loan for one car. And when it sees that, it dedupes those all into what's called into one inquiry. So as long as all of the shopping was done for that auto loan in a 45-day period, then that's considered to be one inquiry. Now, VantageScore is a little bit different. It doesn't matter what industry it is. If they see a lot of inquiries in a 30-day period of time, it's considered to be one inquiry. So you're not dinged 7 times if in fact there were 7 applications run on that auto loan. So first of all, don't worry about that. Second, yeah, it's not a good idea to dispute inquiries on accounts that you were approved for, but this is mostly credit card. This is mostly unsecured. I really wouldn't worry about it too much. An auto loan is a collateralized loan. It's not something they're not going to call the loan instantly because you disputed the inquiry. That's not going to be a problem because they verified your identity when you were at the car dealership or when you were at the bank getting the loan. The reason why it's a different thing with a credit card is because although they did verify your ID, if you're disputing that, it creates a question in their mind whether or not they gave an approval to somebody who isn't who they said they were. So that's why there's different ramifications for doing that. So if it's an auto, I wouldn't worry about it at all. I certainly wouldn't waste my time disputing inquiries on it because, again, there's a great statement that John makes many times that while it's true that inquiries can lower your credit score minimally, it is untrue that they always do, and especially if they're all considered to be one inquiry in the same time frame. People get all excited about inquiries, and inquiries are not anything really to get excited about. So, in fact, most professionals in this space who do full service credit repair don't even mess with your inquiries because they realize that there's, even if they were to get all of them deleted, the idea that your score is going to make this recognizable jump higher is not really the case. Okay, that is it for me. Going on about an hour now. Thank you so much for being here with me. I will be back next Wednesday. It'll be just me. So if we want to talk credit repair and get in depth, we can do that then. Thank you so much for being here today. I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday.